Hi, my name is Maribel. 3 weeks after my husband's funeral, my parents told me to pack my bags and go. Said a billionaire needed a caregiver, and I was free now, weren't I? They never knew I once held the rank of Admiral. They never asked. The maid at that mansion handed me a note. Just one word, Admiral. They sent me there thinking I was desperate. But what happens when a woman they thought they buried walks into the house of the man who helped erase her name? And what if he remembers her too? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you make the whole room hear you? The scent of brewed coffee filled the kitchen, but it did little to soften the weight pressing on my chest. 3 weeks. That's all I had to mourn my husband. 40 years of love and partnership reduced to 21 days before they decided I was costing too much to keep. I stood at the counter, my hand wrapped around the handle of the coffee pot, staring at the chipped ceramic mug I'd used since the Reagan administration. My black dress still hung from my shoulders, the fabric dull from too many wears and too little washing. I hadn't unpacked the rest of my wardrobe since returning from the funeral. At the kitchen table, my father cleared his throat loudly, his fork clinking against the edge of his plate. "You've had enough time, Maribel. Grieving won't pay the bills." His voice sliced through the silence like a blade. Vera didn't even look up from her phone. She was already dressed for the day, clean blouse, hair done, makeup flawless. She always made it look effortless, like playing a part in a movie she'd memorized long ago. "There's a position open," she said, without raising her head. "Private care, high-end client. You wouldn't need to do much medical stuff, mostly companionship, room and board, discreet." She finally looked at me. "Just say yes." I set the pot down slowly, my knuckles aching from the tension. "You found me a job?" Vera gave a small shrug. "You're not doing anything. And it's not like Dad's pension covers extra mouths." Dad grunted his agreement. "You're not a child, Maribel. If you were really someone important, we'd know by now." I nearly laughed. Nearly. But I didn't, because it wasn't worth it, not with them. They thought I'd spent my life cushioned and protected, drifting through roles that were handed to me. They had no idea. They thought I worked admin support for the Navy. That's the version I let them keep. Truth is, I led fleets. I wrote operations plans. I stood in briefing rooms with stars on my shoulders while they wondered why I never brought a boyfriend to Christmas. No one in that room had been there when I retired, alone, from the Navy. No family photos at the medal ceremony. No mention of me in the papers. I wore the uniform of a silent warrior, and silence had followed me home. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "silence is the most loaded weapon we carry." Dad snorted. "Don't start with the riddles. You gonna take the job or not?" I glanced at Vera. Her lips were pursed in that smug little way that said she thought she'd solved the family's problem. It wasn't about helping me. It was about removing me. I nodded once. "Fine." "Great," she said, immediately tapping something into her phone. "I'll send you the details. They want you to start this week." Dad stood from the table. "And clean up when you're done with your coffee. The sink's been a mess since Monday." As they left the room, I looked down at the ring still circling my finger. The gold was dull, worn with time and grief. My husband had been the only person who understood the weight I carried. Now, even his memory was being swept aside to make room for someone else's convenience. I packed that evening. Not much, just the essentials. Vera handed me a thin folder with the client's address and medical summary, like she was issuing marching orders. "This is your shot, Maribel," she said. "Don't screw it up." I didn't answer. I didn't owe her one. In my room, I zipped the suitcase and paused. The hallway was quiet. No goodbyes, no last glances, just my father's muffled TV and Vera's voice somewhere down the hall, already on another call. I walked out of that house like I hadn't poured every ounce of my adulthood into keeping it whole. Like I hadn't paid for plumbing repairs, winter coats, school fees, always quietly, always without asking for thanks. At the door, I turned back once. No one looked. No one moved. They thought they were sending me to serve. They had no idea I'd commanded. The iron gates parted without a sound, slow and deliberate, like a secret being let loose. Cassian Doyle's estate unfolded in front of me like a quiet insult. Stark white walls, long stretches of manicured hedges, fountains that moved more water than my old apartment plumbing ever managed. The driveway curved endlessly, lined with oaks that looked older than any friendship I still had. "The driveway's longer than the road I grew up on," I muttered to myself, one hand gripping the wheel tighter. Figures. It was too polished, too quiet. I knew that kind of silence. It wasn't peace, it was control. The kind of control that looked like hospitality from the outside, but from the inside, it was a warning. You're here on terms that aren't yours. A soldier learns fast when she's not welcome. But this wasn't war. This was diplomacy. The front door opened before I even touched the buzzer. A woman, maybe late 60s, stood tall with a kind of poise you didn't see much anymore. She wore a plain black dress, gray hair twisted into a low bun, not a strand out of place. Her eyes flicked over me once, sharp and fast. "Miss Knox," she said, voice low but firm. "Welcome." I nodded, unsure whether to shake her hand or just follow her inside. She stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. I did. The foyer was marble from wall to wall, the kind that looked like it cost more to maintain than most people's cars. Portraits hung in thick gold frames, people with heavy eyes and heavier surnames. Everything smelled like polished wood and old money. "This way, please," she said, leading me past a hallway longer than the entire first floor of my parents' house. She didn't speak again until we reached a wide room with a vaulted ceiling and tall windows draped in thick curtains. "My name is Odella Greaves. I manage the household." She turned toward me, hands folded. "And it's an honor, Admiral." The word caught me square in the chest. I blinked. "That title doesn't exist here," I said, almost too quickly. She didn't argue, just gave a single, respectful nod, but something in the way she held my gaze told me she knew. Maybe more than I wanted her to. The rest of the day passed in a blur of logistics. Odella showed me to the guest wing, handed me a thin binder outlining Cassian Doyle's routines, dietary restrictions, physical therapy schedule. His rooms were off limits until I was summoned. That night, just after dinner, she returned. Without a word, she slipped me a folded piece of paper. I opened it in my room. One word, handwritten in tidy script. Admiral, no signature, no message, just a reminder that silence didn't mean forgetfulness. Some people remembered, some people never stopped. I sat on the edge of the bed, the note in my hand, staring at the velvet curtains and wondering just how many secrets this house had swallowed over the years. The next blow came later, and not from within the house. Odella knocked gently around 8 p.m., holding out her phone. "You might want to see this." It was a screenshot of a Facebook post. Vera's name at the top, her profile photo of some overpriced brunch plate. Caption: "Some people land on their feet. Private care job for a billionaire? Must be nice." Below it, a dozen comments, all variations of, "So proud of your family, Vera," and "Hope your sister knows how lucky she is." I stared at it for a long time. "I've faced nations," I whispered. "I didn't expect to be brought down by hashtags." I handed the phone back, jaw tight. Odella didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I got up early the next morning, before the sun had burned off the dew from the hedges. I needed to walk, to think, to keep my hands from shaking. I used to command units. I planned extractions. I knew how to contain a crisis, but nothing had prepared me for being dressed up like a nurse and passed around like a solution to someone else's guilt. The estate was still asleep when Odella found me by the window of the east corridor. "He's ready for you," she said. My palms were cold. I nodded once and followed her down the hallway. The double doors creaked open. The room was dim, the kind of dim that money turns into atmosphere. He sat by the window in a wheelchair, half turned toward the light, wearing a navy blue cardigan and an expression I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades, and there he was, not the man I remembered, but the reason I was forced to forget. Cassian's eyes met mine like the slow drag of memory across scar tissue. The air between us shifted, familiar and foreign, tight like a uniform collar years too small. He didn't speak right away, and I didn't offer him anything but silence. We sat in that quiet for nearly a full minute, the kind of silence that has weight, intention. "You were a nurse, right?" he said at last, his voice casual, almost rehearsed. His fingers tapped lightly on the armrest, betraying something more brittle beneath. He knew. I saw it in his face, the way he refused to blink for just a second too long. He knew exactly who I was, and he wanted to pretend we'd never met. I smiled, tight and polite. "Yes, once." He didn't press, but his gaze lingered like it wanted to scrape the truth from my skin. There was a chair opposite his, velvet-lined and too ornate for comfort. I sat anyway, keeping my back straight. The room reeked of old money and something more subtle, lemon oil on paper. That smell, I hadn't expected. It clawed something loose in my memory. Warship command cabins always smelled the same: paper, varnish, disinfectant, and fear. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the one I saw years ago, standing before me as a fire tore through an outpost on the edge of a desert whose name no one could spell. Cassian had come to me then with a report in his hand and shame all over his face. "They're going to ask who signed off," he'd said. I already knew what that meant. "They'll say I authorized the move," I replied. He hadn't corrected them. He hadn't said a word. And when the inquiry started, he vanished. I took the fall. They gave me a medal. Then they gave me silence. My clearance was pulled, my command reassigned, quietly, efficiently, no ceremony, just a long walk off a short platform. The man before me adjusted his cardigan and looked toward the window. His face had softened with age, but the shape of his cowardice remained. "You've kept busy," he said. I nodded, holding back every sharp response that sat behind my teeth. "I'm sure we'll find our rhythm soon," he added. "The routine's fairly simple." Right, routine, like pretending history didn't exist, like acting as though he hadn't helped erase my name from reports, from rooms, from legacy. After our brief exchange, I excused myself and returned to the guest wing. My mind swirled, a quiet storm threatening to pick up speed. Odella knocked on my door less than an hour later. "I have something for you," she said softly. She handed me a thin slip of paper, folded in precise thirds. I waited until she'd gone before opening it. Admiral, same handwriting, same restraint. That single word weighed more than my entire file with the Department of Defense. I found Odella near the kitchen later, slicing pears for what I assumed was Cassian's dinner tray. "How long have you worked here?" I asked. She didn't look up. 16 years. "And before that?" "I served under you." The knife paused against the cutting board. "I was logistics, rear support, Operation Cinderlight. We all knew it wasn't your fault." I blinked. That name. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. "But you didn't speak up." She finally looked at me. He told everyone it was him, that he led. But those of us who knew, we never forgot. I swallowed back the ache forming in my throat. They didn't just take my title, I said. They rewrote me out of my own story. Odella placed the sliced pears in a bowl. And yet, here you are. That night, lying in the too soft bed beneath the too perfect ceiling, I let the weight of it all settle. They gave me silence, not because I was wrong, but because I wouldn't play the game. I wouldn't flatter the committee, wouldn't assign blame downward, wouldn't shift the truth to protect a man with connections I couldn't trace. History is written by survivors, I whispered to the ceiling, and sometimes by liars. Around 9, another knock. Mr. Doyle has requested you join him for dinner, Odella said. I didn't answer right away, just stared at the ceiling for another beat. We once shared battlefields. Now he wanted to share wine. One of us had forgotten why that was dangerous. The dining room was too still, the kind of quiet that didn't welcome conversation, just measured it. Silverware laid out like instruments of diplomacy. Candlelight flickered across the polished surface of a long mahogany table that probably hadn't hosted a genuine conversation in years. Cassian sat at the head of the table, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Odella stood off to the side, the perfect shadow, hands clasped in front of her like a sentry at post. He gestured toward the seat on his right. I walked the length of the table, every footstep tapping on the marble like a gavel in a courtroom. The chair creaked slightly as I sat. The stem of my water glass caught his reflection, distorted just enough to match the way my memories held him. Not cruel, just convenient. He poured himself a glass of red wine, then looked over at me. You must find the transition difficult, from commanding fleets to tending to me. I didn't look away. Not as difficult as pretending we don't remember what was erased. There it was. I'd broken the surface. He didn't flinch, just smiled faintly, swirling the wine in slow, deliberate circles. You always saw too much, and you never said enough. Odella moved silently to serve the plates. The scent of roasted lamb and rosemary drifted in, filling the space we refused to occupy with words. He cut into the meat, eyes lowered. You know, I didn't write the report. No, I said. You just didn't correct it. His knife paused midair. I leaned back. You knew what that silence would cost me, and you let it happen. The room didn't change, but something between us did. Not anger, not even regret, just acknowledgement. And for a man like Cassian Doyle, that was the loudest he'd ever be willing to speak. I trust few people, he said after a beat. But you, I know what you're capable of. You could stay, help me run things here. I set down my fork. That trust cost me everything once. His jaw tensed. You're offering me comfort in the ruins you helped create, I added. That's not generosity, that's guilt. He said nothing after that. Dinner continued. We ate, we didn't talk. When the plates were cleared, I stood and left without asking to be excused. He didn't stop me. In my room, I kicked off my shoes, shoulders aching from holding my back straight for too long. I sat on the edge of the bed, let the silence settle in, then reached for my notebook. I didn't write anything, just held the pen like it might stop my hands from trembling. A knock came, soft, 2 taps. I opened the door. Odella stood there, holding an envelope. No return address, no markings, just my name written in a hand I hadn't seen in over 2 decades. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of the reprimand I'd received after Operation Cinderlight. The document that had ended my command, stripped my security clearance, made me a ghost in the very halls I once ruled. But this copy was different. No signature at the bottom. Just a line where someone was supposed to have stood. The man who signed my silence never left a signature, but someone else kept a copy. The reprimand sat under the desk lamp, its edges curled with time, its ink faded but not forgotten. I hadn't slept, not really. I'd turned the paper over at least 100 times, as if looking at it long enough would make a signature magically appear. It never did. I remembered the day they handed it to me. An assistant slid it across the table like she was passing me a dinner menu. No eye contact, no explanation. Just sign here to acknowledge receipt. There was no trial, no defense, just silence. Neatly packaged, efficiently delivered. Now, in this new light, I saw it differently. There were details I never noticed before. The typed date didn't match the events. The reference number was altered, slightly out of sequence with the ones I'd seen for other actions in the same operation. And, of course, the most glaring omission: no signature at the bottom. They'd told me it was a clerical mistake, that the original got lost in processing. Happens sometimes, they'd said. Don't read into it. And I believed them. Until now. I pressed my fingers to the page. The paper still smelled faintly of burnt toner and cheap bureaucracy, like broken promises and broken protocol. A call lit up my phone. Vera. Of course. I let it ring twice, then answered. Maribel, she began without preamble. I was thinking, since you're, living there now, I assume they're paying you well. Cassian's loaded, right? I'm not discussing this with you. Come on, she said, the edge in her voice not even thinly veiled. You know Mom and Dad are struggling. We've got the mortgage, the car note, you've got space, you've got money. What's the big deal? The big deal, I said slowly, is that you didn't care what I gave up. You never asked. You only care now because you think I owe you. There was a pause on her end, then a laugh. Sharp, bitter. You've always acted like you were better than the rest of us. No, Vera. I just stopped pretending I wasn't. I ended the call. Not more than 30 minutes later, Odella appeared at my door, holding a manila folder. Found this while organizing the West filing room. Thought you'd want to see it. Inside was a stack of papers, some official, some handwritten. At first glance, it was mundane. Bills, old appointment slips, a recipe for lemon bars in someone's cursive. But tucked in the middle was something that sucked the air right out of the room. It was an application for veteran survivor benefits, filed under my name. Only, the listed widow wasn't me. It was Vera. The handwriting was hers. The date matched the month after my retirement. The form had gone through. Approved, stamped, paid, my name, her gain. I sat down. They didn't just erase me, I said aloud. They replaced me. I spent the next few hours scanning every document, organizing them in labeled folders, photographing every page and cross-checking timestamps. I made notes, created backups, sent encrypted copies to a personal drive. Odella brought me tea and didn't ask questions. In the age of information, I muttered, ignorance is a choice, and silence is strategy. This wasn't going to be about rage or revenge. This was about records, unassailable, time-stamped truth. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I was going to raise evidence. Truth leaves tracks. And I was following mine backward. As I reached the bottom of the folder, another document slid out. A cover letter from someone on the tribunal committee. An internal memo, dated months after the operation I took the fall for. Signed by a name I hadn't seen in years. And now, I'd seen it again, on a billboard last week. He was running for office. So that's why they buried me, I whispered. He needed my silence to build his name. By the time the sun cracked the edge of the sky, I'd already filled half a notebook and brewed 2 pots of black coffee. The desk in the estate's study was buried under a spread of documents, folders, and post-it flags. I used to coordinate fleet operations from screens smaller than this workspace. Now I was using it to map out a war of another kind. I didn't need revenge. I needed record. I opened my laptop and started drafting an anonymous tip, clean, factual, sourced. I attached scanned versions of the tribunal's unsigned reprimand, the forged benefit applications, and that email with the altered timestamps. I redacted names where needed, but left just enough for someone with curiosity and access to start pulling the right threads. That's when I found it. Another envelope buried in the pile I hadn't fully sorted. It was from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The name on it wasn't mine. It was my father's. It confirmed a benefits deposit. A check had been issued years ago, processed under my former designation, only I never saw a cent. I held it for a long moment, fingers stiff, the air in the room thinning. "I didn't just disappear," I whispered. "They signed me out of my own life." I remembered that year, how quickly my father paid off his truck, how he suddenly had the funds to redo the roof. I thought it was retirement kicking in. Now I saw it for what it was, theft, silent, unspoken, paper-slick betrayal. "They cashed my past like a check," I muttered, "and never told me the balance." I didn't cry. Not this time. That version of me had already been buried. At exactly 9:37 a.m., Odella knocked softly and stepped inside, holding a small USB drive in one hand. "You might want to see this," she said. We plugged it in together. The folder opened to a series of email exchanges between a defense contractor and a tribunal committee staffer, names redacted, but timelines clear. Subject line, Cinderlight Media Risk. In one, a staffer wrote, "She's too difficult to protect politically. The optics don't work. Best to shift the language of the report. Easier to move forward." They didn't say I was guilty. They said I didn't fit. "It was never about what I did," I whispered. "It was about who I wouldn't kneel to." I copied every file, encrypted them, stored backups on a private server. Then I took a deep breath and reached for my phone. It rang twice before voicemail kicked in. "Vera," I said calmly, "I know what you forged, and I know what Dad deposited. No threats, no yelling, just facts delivered cold, the way they'd delivered judgment on me." I stared out the window as I ended the call. The lawn was being trimmed by a landscaper in a crisp green uniform. His world was tidy, contained. Mine was just beginning to split open. I didn't scream, I told the air. I gave them the silence they had weaponized, turned sharp and deliberate. Desmond Tutu's words came back to me from a lecture I once attended. Never raise your voice. Improve your argument. That would be my strategy. And I had plenty to argue with now. Later that afternoon, as I poured a cup of tea in the study, a knock came. Not Odella this time. A courier. He handed me a sealed white envelope, handwritten in careful, almost calligraphic cursive. Maribel Knox. Inside was an invitation, embossed, formal, theatrical in the way political gestures always are. The Honorable Chair invites you to a Veterans Service Recognition Ceremony. At the bottom of the card, in looping ink, was a name I hadn't said aloud in years. The man who once sat at the head of the tribunal that stripped me of everything. So he remembered me after all. I wonder if he's ready for what I'll bring with me. I pulled up to the Veterans Hall in downtown Pensacola 5 minutes early and still felt late. There was a weight in the air, not from humidity but from expectation, the kind you can't brush off with a smile or small talk. Outside, volunteers bustled around banners, adjusting tables and testing microphones, their movements rehearsed, mechanical. The building loomed like a courthouse. Big windows, bigger lies. I stepped out of the car, metal pinned discreetly above my left breast pocket, not because I needed recognition, but because I refused to show up invisible. I'd worn that ribbon across battlefields. Today, I'd wear it across theirs. Inside, the air was cooler, but no less heavy. Posters lined the hallway, campaign-style photographs of the event's keynote organizer, the same man who once scribbled my future away on government letterhead. His smile stretched too wide, his eyes too still, the kind of man who built ladders from other people's silence. "I wasn't invited to be honored," I muttered. "I was invited to behave." I spotted Vera before she saw me. She was in the front row, seated as if she owned it, legs crossed, clipboard in hand, headset mic draped around her neck like she was coordinating a Super Bowl halftime show. She turned and caught sight of me, her lips curled slightly. "You made it," she whispered as I approached. "Good. Just try not to make it about you, okay? You're not the story." I leaned closer, my voice low and even. "I never needed to be, but I won't let you rewrite it." She blinked, but didn't respond. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. Earlier that morning, I'd received an anonymous email, whistleblower style. Attached was a scanned legal document filed just 3 days ago. Vera had claimed emergency guardianship over my financial matters, citing emotional instability due to unresolved grief and military trauma. I didn't need a courtroom to see what she was doing. She wasn't protecting me. She was positioning herself again. From the corner of my eye, I saw a familiar profile entering the hall. Cassian Doyle. Pushed in by a handler, he looked thinner, older. Not in years, but in distance, like a man who'd finally run out of places to hide. He glanced toward the stage, then toward me. "I told them not to invite you," he muttered as he rolled by. "And yet," I replied, "here we are." He didn't answer. The ceremony began on time. A pastor said a few words about duty and honor. A choir sang something off-key but heartfelt. Then came the tributes, followed by photo ops and polite applause. The event chair stepped up to the podium, clean-cut, polished, the same man who once called me an internal security liability. "And now," he said with pride, "to present our community honor, a woman of quiet dignity, Miss Vera Mallory." The audience clapped, cameras flashed. Vera walked up the stage with grace that was 90% performance and 10% borrowed. I didn't stand to stop her. I stood to be seen. I walked up slowly, stopping halfway to the podium, stage right. People turned. Eyes widened. Phones lifted. My medals caught the light, subtle but unmistakable. Vera paused mid-sentence. The air shifted, then I said it, soft, steady, but sharp as a blade's edge. "Before you give that award, ask yourself, are you celebrating service or silence?" The room froze. Cassian dropped his glass. The politician turned pale. And Vera just stood there, mouth slightly open, like the wind had been punched out of her. They built this stage to be seen. I stepped on it to be heard. No one moved. The microphone hissed, its static the only sound in the room that suddenly felt too small, too exposed. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the applause that had just faded. They didn't expect a voice, just presence. They wanted me to sit, smile, and disappear between speeches. But I didn't sit, and I didn't smile. Vera stood frozen mid-step on the stage, her script trembling in her hands. Her face held that mask of performative concern. the one she wore at funerals and fundraisers like she was starring in someone else's grief. The event organizer cleared his throat, trying to steer us back to normal. "Miss Mallory, please, proceed with the presentation." He tried to say it like it was still his show, but the audience didn't shift their gaze. They were watching me now. I didn't look at Vera. I didn't need to. I reached into my blazer and pulled out a folded paper, stiff from age and truth. I unfolded it with the same precision I used to give briefing orders. "This," I said, raising it slightly, "is from an internal military newsletter dated 12 years ago." The projector behind Vera flickered as the text scrambled. I handed the page to the AV assistant nearby, who, bless her bold heart, connected it without question. On the screen appeared a black and white scan, a photo of me in uniform, standing with a dozen soldiers in the middle of a relief operation. Above it, a headline, "Field Command Bravery Recognized in After-Action Report." Below it, in red block letters, "Internal circulation only." The audience leaned in. "This commendation never saw daylight," I said, voice even, not because it wasn't earned, but because the system forgot the face behind the voice. Someone in the back murmured. The organizer adjusted his tie, sweat visible at the collar. "This award today was meant for a name they erased. Mine." Vera tried to speak, lips parting. But the projector screen abruptly changed. Cassian's aide, God bless his incompetence or intention, had plugged in the wrong USB. Instead of the tribute montage, a new video began to play. The title card was simple. Confidential. Statement prepared by Cassian Doyle. Cassian's face filled the screen. Older, fragile, honest in a way he never had been in person. "I was the one they protected," his recorded voice said. "She was the one who led." There was a collective gasp. Phones came up. Some people stood. Others whispered. "I didn't speak when I should have. I let her fall alone, and for that, I apologize." Vera's face drained of color. Cassian's image remained still for a second, then cut out. I turned back toward the audience. The silence had weight now, not awkward, but reverent. The event chair rushed forward. This wasn't scheduled." "No," I said, facing him. "Truth never is." He stepped back. Vera stood paralyzed, the award plaque in her hands like it had turned to stone. She blinked, then blinked again. Then she turned and walked off the stage. No words, no tears, just the sound of her heels echoing across wood. Cassian stayed seated, eyes low, hands gripping the arms of his chair. He didn't move, he didn't look at me, and that was fine, because I wasn't here for him. I stepped forward and addressed the crowd directly. "For every woman whose name was scrubbed from ceremony, whose silence was mistaken for absence, this moment is yours too." There was applause, hesitant at first, then steady, not loud, but honest. After the ceremony ended and people filtered out, a woman in a gray blazer approached me. She wasn't with the press pool. She didn't have a camera. She held a recorder in one hand, not yet switched on. "Ms. Knox," she said, her voice measured. "I'd like to talk. Off the record. For now." I nodded. It took them a decade to forget me. It took one afternoon to remember who I was. I woke before the light reached the windows. My phone was vibrating against the nightstand like it was nervous to be the messenger. I picked it up without checking the screen, already feeling the hum of everything that must have exploded after yesterday. 63 unread messages, 14 missed calls, my name in bolded headlines on veteran forums I hadn't logged into in years. I wasn't trending, but I was remembered, and that was louder. I scrolled slowly, my thumb still stiff from gripping the edge of the podium the day before. The first message was from a former sergeant I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. "You were my first CO. You changed how I saw women in command. Yesterday, what you did, it reminded me why I joined." Another followed seconds later. "I was in the back of that hearing. I knew you didn't fold. I was wrong to stay quiet. If you speak, I'll back you now." The knot in my chest didn't dissolve. It shifted, heavy, but not sharp anymore. I didn't reply. "Not yet. Injustice takes time," I whispered. "But truth is patient." A soft knock at the door made me look up. Odella entered holding a folded newspaper, her face calm, but eyes shining. "You made the front page." She handed it to me. Front and center, above the fold, was a grainy black and white photo. I knew it instantly. I'd been 29, mud-covered, holding a wounded private in my arms, mid-evacuation during Operation Cinderlight. Caption: "The woman behind the silence." That image wasn't supposed to exist publicly. It was meant for internal records only. But now it was out, raw and undeniable. I didn't cry because I was broken. I cried because, for once, someone remembered without asking for proof. By mid-morning, the internet had taken on a life of its own. Videos from the ceremony had circulated. Cassian's confession, Vera's stunned silence, my single sentence. Then came the backlash. A podcast clip surfaced that afternoon. Vera's voice, sharp and defensive. "Look, things got out of hand. I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I was just protecting our family's legacy." Legacy, to her, was whatever she could wear to the next gala, but the comments section wasn't buying it. She forged benefits under her sister's name. Military fraud isn't a misstep, it's a felony. Funny how protecting legacy sounds like code for "got caught." Someone even uploaded redacted financials showing deposits made to our parents' account under my designation. The internet wasn't always cruel. Sometimes it held receipts. By late evening, I found myself alone in the guest quarters. I opened the ceremony footage, not for pride, but to see it clearly without adrenaline. Cassian, I noticed, never once looked up while I spoke, not even when I quoted him. Vera? She looked too much, desperate for cues, for validation, for a mirror to fix what wouldn't reflect right anymore. Sometimes guilt makes you avoid mirrors. Sometimes it makes you polish them. Outside, the sun dipped low. I poured a glass of water and sat by the window, thinking nothing and everything all at once. Then came the letter. It wasn't emailed. It wasn't texted. It was slipped under my door, old school. Handwritten, faded cursive on a cream-colored envelope. My name, just Maribel. I opened it slowly, already knowing it wasn't from Vera. Inside was a single sheet. "I should have stood by you. I knew you were right. But I was scared. Of them, of the system, of being next. Maybe it's not too late." No name. But I recognized the handwriting. It took them a decade to forget me. It took one afternoon to remember who I was. The envelope sat unopened on the windowsill until the first sliver of light touched it. I knew the handwriting. Shaky but deliberate. It belonged to a man I once carried out of a combat zone with a shattered leg and more pride than blood in his veins. Lucan Reyes's father. I unfolded the letter like it might crumble. The ink wavered in places, like he'd paused too long between words. "I owe you my life. I just wish I'd had the courage to say that sooner. I saw your photo in the paper. I knew the moment I saw your eyes. It's been 20 years, and I've carried the silence with me. I let them erase you while I kept breathing because of you. There wasn't a signature, just a name scribbled once at the bottom, as if even now he wasn't sure he had the right. I pressed the letter flat across my lap, sitting in the garden behind the estate. The morning dew clung to my boots, and the air tasted clean, like things unsaid were finally evaporating. Justice doesn't always arrive with a gavel. Sometimes it comes handwritten. Sometimes it just comes late. I held the letter in my hand, not like a trophy, but like a folded flag. There was still grief, yes, but it had changed shape. It no longer pressed against me. It stood beside me. I wasn't alone in memory anymore. Before breakfast, another envelope arrived, this one plain, unmarked. Inside was a single line scrawled in Cassian Doyle's old, angular script. You deserved better. That was it. No apology, no elaboration, and somehow it was exactly what it needed to be. I didn't frame it. I didn't burn it either. I placed it in the drawer beside the tribunal document, not erased, documented. Midday brought the news cycle. The fallout from the ceremony had begun spinning through local and national outlets. The politician who chaired my tribunal stepped down for health reasons. Funny how truth causes sudden fatigue. Vera's nonprofit lost 2 major sponsors overnight. The press release was laced with words like realignment and internal review. I didn't read beyond the second paragraph. Cassian, under scrutiny now by a veterans watchdog group. There were whispers of contracts awarded under bias, operational cover-ups. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just lands. That evening, I sat by the fire in the small study wing Odella had unofficially dubbed my thinking room. My phone rang just after 7. Ms. Knox, the voice on the line said, formal but warm. I'm with the National Women Veterans Coalition. We've been following your story. We'd like to invite you to consult on a new division we're building, focused on women erased from military history. I was quiet for a moment. Not just a face, I said. No, she replied. A voice. A mind. We want you writing the policy, not just reading it. They offered me a seat at the table. But this time, I'd be the one writing the agenda. The sun cut across my desk like a line drawn between what was and what would never be again. I sat there, staring at my phone, as it rang with the kind of rhythm only family has, the one that dares to sound entitled even after everything. I didn't want to answer, but I did. Maribel, Vera's voice came through, steady, rehearsed. I saw the article. I know you're being asked to lead something now. That's big. I waited. She kept going. Just don't forget where you came from. That was her version of grace. I haven't, I said evenly. I just stopped trying to be welcome there. She didn't reply. Not with words, just the kind of breath that meant she wanted to say something else, but knew I wouldn't let her. When the call ended, I didn't cry, I didn't pace or curse. I walked to my closet and pulled out an old cardboard box I hadn't opened since I left my parents' house. Dust layered its edges, but the tape still held firm. Inside were fragments of a girl I barely remembered. Polaroids, award ribbons from middle school science fairs, letters I wrote to Santa and never sent. At the bottom was a birthday card, unopened, addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. I opened it. It was blank. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she never meant to send it. Either way, I didn't need it anymore. Forgiveness doesn't mean reunion. It means release. That afternoon, a thick ivory envelope arrived, my parents' names in calligraphy across the return label. Inside was a formal dinner invitation, boxed, embossed, overdone in every way they never were when it mattered. It said, "To make amends." I sat with it for 10 minutes. Then I took a pen and wrote across the card in blue ink, "Closure isn't a location." I mailed it back. Some bridges are better observed from a distance, burnt, but beautiful in hindsight. The next day, I stood in front of the foundation board, 12 women, different backgrounds, same steel in their spines. They asked if I wanted to be a figurehead. I told them no. "I'm not here for a seat with a plaque," I said. "I'm here to dismantle what made seats like mine necessary in the first place." The chairwoman leaned forward. "We don't need names. We need fire. We need clarity." "Then that," I said, "you'll have." Power is not given. It's claimed in silence and held in clarity. Late that evening, a courier arrived. He didn't say a word, just handed me a small, soft package wrapped in brown paper. There was no note, no sender. Inside was a photo, black and white, slightly torn on one corner. My unit, our final op. Me, mid-command, eyes sharp. Cassian was in it too. Folded behind the photo was a medal, one I'd never received. It wasn't fancy, no ceremony, just weight and metal and memory. It wasn't validation. It was acknowledgement. And that finally was enough. The conference room in D.C. didn't have a flag. It didn't need one. What it had was something more powerful: agendas, voices, decisions. And at the head of that long table, where men used to sit and nod over things they never endured, I sat with a pen in my hand and fire in my chest. "This will be the final vote," I said, voice steady, looking around at 12 faces, each woman with her own battles carved into her eyes. Effective immediately, the advocacy wing will be known as Admiral's Silence. A few heads bowed in reverence. Others smiled. "Not every hero gets a parade," I said quietly, "but they will get their place in history." There was applause, real, raw, not for me, but for every woman they'd forgotten to count. As the press conference wrapped up, a man in a charcoal suit stepped toward the podium. He wasn't on the schedule. He didn't need to be. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Doyle," he said, unfolding a document with the seal of Cassian's estate. Per his final instructions, all assets under his private foundation will be donated in full to the Admiral's Silence Initiative. Gasps spread across the room like static. Cameras clicked. Pens scribbled. "He further states," the man continued, "that this foundation would not exist if not for the woman who stood when everyone else sat down. In his words, she is the reason I ever succeeded, and the reason I must now make it count." I didn't cry, but I did look down and whisper, "I didn't win a war. I outlasted a silence." Afterward, I stepped out into the sun. That's where Vera found me. No announcement, no grand entrance. Just her, standing in flats too expensive to be humble, sunglasses tucked into her hair like a shield. "We're still sisters, right?" she asked. I didn't blink. "Sisterhood isn't blood, it's behavior, and yours doesn't belong to mine." She flinched, but I wasn't cruel. I was just done. "That's not anger," I said quietly. "That's a boundary." She nodded once, then left. No speech, no twist, just distance, exactly what I needed from her. Later that week, I went to the War Memorial Wall in Arlington. I carried only one thing with me, the framed medal Cassian never got to see me pin. I didn't bring it for display. I brought it for goodbye. I found the name of a soldier from my unit, one who never came home, one who had written me a letter I still kept, even after everything else had burned. I placed the medal beneath his name, not out of grief, but because legacy isn't about trophies, it's about truth. I didn't leave shame there. I left memory, clarity, dignity. I was erased in ink. I returned in stone. As I walked back toward the car, I could feel the empty metal box in my coat pocket. But I didn't feel lighter or heavier. I just felt ready. They buried my name. I turned it into a banner.